Hello there. Let's talk about drafting the methodology. The methodology section may look like the most straightforward section to draft, but as the word methodology implies, not just method, it's ology, it's a study of. There's a whole new field of study behind not only methodology in general, but also methods and methodology within each discipline. In order to ensure rigor and reliability and validity in our research, and also in our reporting, we spend some time understanding methodology and use those ideas and skills in the writing process. We need to engage deeply with the methodological scholarship because that scholarship, the field's knowledge about method, is what guides the choice of appropriate methods and underpins the credibility and the replicability of our research. If we have professional chefs, for example, we tend to follow the tools and techniques of other professional chefs. It's the same thing with scholarship and research. Often scholars, and especially scholars in the scientific fields, or scholars that are emerging in any field, tend to consider the methodologies of their articles rather straightforward or easy to write as a part of their journal article. But this section is actually far from straightforward. It requires a deep understanding of the disciplinary tradition, as I said, of what tools and methods are used, how to use them effectively, and why to use what tools we use and how, so that the research can be made robust and the reporting can be effective. In the tracking and drafting of methodology, transparency is vital to enable other researchers to follow your method as well as to understand what you did. So from scholars in the global south, outside of the global academic centers, which dominate the publication venues, writing the methodology section can add unique challenges. We often need to adapt methods and tools that were originally developed in the global north to fit our local context. This adaptation process may involve critical engagement with existing methods to reinvent some methods. For example, a scholar doing research in indigenous communities about the environment or culture in those communities cannot simply walk into the community and ask people to sign the consent form for their research. That scholar may need to understand the histories of abuse of those people sometimes, issues of cultural sensitivity, what people understand and do not understand when we bring outside methods into the study process. There may be very different cultural understanding of privacy and trust and so on. And so any scholar who is doing research in a very unique place with methods created in other places must develop and use new ways of doing research for that particular context. And then when you start writing, the method that you use in the local context may be hard for others to understand, so it needs a little bit of extra effort to communicate your method. Even in science and engineering, the tools used for measuring or observing phenomena in one context may not be helpful in other contexts. Think about air pressure. Somebody measuring air pressure at the bottom, at the sea level, and somebody measuring air pressure in the mountains of Peru would not be able to use the same barometers. Same thing with cultural and political and economic and educational tools and methods of study. So scholars from the global south must navigate the expectations of the global north dominated journal and audiences, which may not always appreciate or understand the nuances of locally adapted methods. So it's about communicating clearly as well as adapting methods to fit your context. So to do justice to their studies and engage effectively with international gatekeepers and readers, scholars from the global south should articulate how their methodological choices are both informed by and adapted to their contexts. This includes discussing the theoretical framework that guide the methodological approaches and explaining how these frameworks are applied or modified to suit local conditions. And by doing so, they not only highlight the relevance and rigor of their research, but also contribute to a more inclusive and diversified global academic discourse. So it is through thoughtful, thorough, and detailed methodology section that you write that you can showcase the value of your research. If the method doesn't look strong, rigorous, transparent, or the method doesn't seem to justify why that particular tool or method was used in that particular context, the writing may become weaker. So it's not just following universal principles, but also adapting those principles to local context and communicating that clearly. That will make your methodology effective. Let us go a little deeper into the methodology section in terms of writing the methodology or drafting the methodology section. Let's start with the empirical research, where you have data, concrete data, objective or subjective, but evidence based on study. In empirical kinds of research and articles, the methodology section will have the design of the study. What did you study? How did you study? And why did you study in that method? Why did you use those tools and techniques? You may have used interviews, you may have used surveys, you may have used measurements and assessment, observation and analysis methods, whatnot. So you need to justify the what, why, and how. And then there may be a scope in the study that the methodology needs to describe. How broad was the data? What was the data set? Or who were the participants of your study if it is social science and humanities? Why did you select that particular sample? Why that scope? Why didn't you go further? Why that size? Why didn't you interview 200 people, but instead 20, right? And that kind of scope and justification of scope in terms of how well the data can be representative, or the data can be deep enough, or the data can tell the story. The next one would be data collection methods. Not only the scope, but the methods, as I was saying earlier, that may include tools or methods or strategies, techniques, conventions. Unpack that. What did you use for conducting the study? And finally, the data analysis process, which is after collecting the data, how did you analyze it? Did you organize it in a certain way? Did you process it? Did you use certain tools to do the analysis that is different from the collection process? And how did you establish the rigor in the analysis process? Because you can not only make mistakes in the collection process, you can also make mistakes in the analysis process. Invalid measurement as well as invalid collection can cause problems in the data. So just to unpack what I just said, detailing the design of the study is revealing to the reader what kind of study it is. Is it experimental? Is it observational? Is it based on interviews, whatever that was? And then you might need to convey the settings and duration. For example, the setting may be a observational setting or control setting or lab setting, or it could be a social, interactive, naturalistic settings. So study a book on methodology. I have a whole bunch of books on methodology here in my field, but in your field, there may be distinct methodological books. It's a good idea to study it up whenever you're writing more and more, study methodology more and more. Even after writing for 20 years, I still read a new book on methodology once in a while, every year. If, for example, a longitudinal study, like over time. After the type and setting, you need to indicate to the reader when you write if there was a control group and an experimental group. If that was the case, then you would describe that, right, if applicable. Similarly, when you design and describe your method, as I indicated earlier, the sample size may need to be revealed to the reader. What was the size of the sample? And what was the nature of that sample too? Why that type of sample? And then scope as well as rationale. Why? Sometimes it is good to tell the reader why you included certain data and why you excluded certain data, why you selected certain people or certain artifacts or certain condition, but why you excluded others. It may be because that is what will answer the question you're asking, or it may be because it's not feasible to go beyond that within the timeline. In other words, specify the scope and rationale. And if there is a method by which you recruited people or collected the sample, that recruitment method, for example, you may have sent out emails to people to participate in your study. Or you may have talked to people in person, or you may have snowballed the process by talking to people as you go along the way. That will change the quality of the data, and therefore it's important to reveal. So anything in the method, data collection process, data collection tools, data analysis process, data analysis tools, anything that needs to be told to the reader so the reader can judge the quality of your writing, that needs to be told. Again, I'm still unpacking a little more. The instruments and tools used may be technical, they may be non-technical, they may be hardware, software, traditional, modern, digital, manual. And the process may be who was involved, what was involved, how did you do it, when did you do it. In some cases, morning, afternoon, and evening may make a difference. In other cases, single interviews and focus group interviews and conversations in the public may completely change the dynamics of the collection of the quality of the data. And then finally, and very importantly, depending on the institutional rules of your country and your institution, tell the reader what ethical considerations you have taken. Did you take consent? Did you let people know about the harms and benefits of the research? Did you protect the privacy? Did you follow the rules of your university? Oftentimes, journals will want to know what exactly you did to protect the rights of the people that were involved, especially, and in some cases, even animals and the environment. In the analysis process, to go a little deeper, tools and methods used for data analysis may be statistical, maybe thematic tools and methods. For example, theming is a methodological tool. So if you're looking at patterns of words and you're collecting those words into themes and then those themes into arguments, that qualitative research method, those are tools. In other analytical process, you may feed data into a machine and the machine may produce results or visualization. That may be the tool. But you do have these technical intellectual tools that you use for analysis. And then there may be analytical theory. I will get to that in a moment, but there may be no actual tool, but there may be an intellectual tool that is a theoretical framework derived from understanding or creating a method of study and analysis. There may be interpretations of finding that are done in the data analysis process. For example, you may begin by finding patterns, or you may simply jump into what will answer your questions, what findings will answer your question, but there's always organization involved. Organization is part of interpretation. And then looking at patterns and gaps and answers and questions, that is part of interpretation. But especially answering the hypothesis or research question is the most important guiding principle that will help you to organize and make sense. Simply looking for random patterns is not enough. It is the patterns of findings that will answer the question or respond to the hypothesis that matters in the interpretation process when you interpret findings. And the other thing is, in most disciplines, contextualization is important. Sometimes the contextualization is putting it in the context of your discipline, existing knowledge, the existing methods, existing theory, existing understanding, or it could be contextualization in the profession. For example, if you're doing an educational research, the professional context is the context of practice is the context of an interpretation, right? You're not going to simply theoretically interpret the data. You're going to connect it to the practice, the teaching practice, the learning practice. Or sometimes it may be social. You may go beyond that and say, put it in the social context and explain, especially in the humanities or social sciences, you may explain your data in the social context. And finally, whatever you do, you need to really distinguish between what is significant and what is not significant. Like I said, there are patterns or data, but if you do not see pictures emerging, or if you do not know which one is significant and which one is insignificant in relation to your hypothesis or research question, that is not valuable data. Let's talk about another type of article, review articles, which tend to be theoretical. Sometimes people write theoretical articles that are not systematic or significant reviews. There's a limited amount of review and a lot of theory. But most of the times, review articles and theoretical articles tend to be the same. Okay, and sometimes review articles that do not theorize very much can be different. But it is a good idea to put the review and theories together because they tend to occur together in practice. In review articles or theoretical articles, or in both, the method is really the theoretical framing. You are developing an interpretive framework, developing a discursive framework, you're developing an intellectual framework as the method. For example, if you want to explain the idea of language-based discrimination by using political understanding of power and discrimination and hierarchy and hegemony, then you can bring that idea of hegemony, let's say from Gramsci, and you apply that idea in the process of understanding linguistic bias. So sometimes you actually borrow the theory wholesale from other people and apply that in the text or analysis or discussion of finding. Other times you can generate the theory yourself. Either way, you're creating a theoretical framework. Most of the times, theoretical frameworks are created partly by bringing other people's ideas and synthesizing into your own unique framework, and then using that framework as a tool, as a method for discussion and analysis. The theoretical apparatus is the method in non-empirical theoretical articles. When you do that, when you're using literature review-based approach to discussing the scholarship or issue, or when you are creating a theoretical framework to discuss a phenomenon, the literature search must be systematic, more or less. Otherwise, you might be creating an unreliable tool. So tools to be effective and reliable, you might want to set the parameters of your search And then that parameters will guide a more robust theoretical framework creation. And that may need a sort of thoughtful approach to what you are including and what you're excluding. Are you including by time or by theme or by issue or by perspective, by context? And finally, the thing that you really want to do in the theoretical articles is how your method helps to meet your stated objective. Here too, exactly like in the empirical studies, you need the right tool to study the right problem. Here too, you need to develop the right tool to discuss and explore the right problem. Here's a quick example of a theoretical framework. I was recently with a colleague writing an article in which we wanted to develop a rhetorical plus theoretical framework for supporting the development and publication of multilingual and translingual scholarship. So if scholars around the world are going to publish in all of their languages, depending on who the audience, context, medium, and purpose are, then we need to give them the freedom to choose based on those rhetorical elements which language to use in what publication. But in order to do that, you really have to understand the politics of language. If a certain language is respected and other language is not respected, the communicative purpose is going to be sidelined by the political domination of a language upon others. So we were unpacking how using that rhetorical political framework would allow us to promote multilingual scholarship. So that's the methodological framework that we developed, and we demonstrated how to practice multilingual scholarship. If you are focusing on lit review for your article, or if when you are focusing on lit review as part of any article, there are a few things you might need to pay attention in terms of the search as a method, the search as a process. Sometimes you are searching in database and other sources, and you need to keep track of the keywords and the search terms. If you do that, it will be easier for you to tell the reader what you found by using what keywords and what databases and what strategies, what filters. That itself will become your methodological paragraph or section. And your search strategy and criteria may involve criteria for selection of the study, then criteria of excluding the studies, and then justification of those criteria for inclusion and exclusion. So that's a little bit more on literature review, whatever other methods you're using. Just to wrap up, in addition to what we were discussing earlier, there are other types of journal articles. Just want to mention that. Sometimes you do case studies, other times you do methodological papers, sometimes it's textual analysis, sometimes archival studies. There are other kinds of studies, but the most common are empirical papers and review or theoretical papers. Those are the two most common, and these are some others. I hope you got something out of this quick video on how to write up the methodology section, how to establish rigor, how to reveal to the reader how you did what you did. See you soon. Thank you. Gracias.